I've stalked this subreddit for a while and couldn't decide whether or not to post my story, but I'm feeling brave on this Monday. It was a very long time ago, back in 1973. I know it was summer, I was 6, and we were living on Monica Lane in Madison. Thing is, I sort of recalled it, but never put 2 and 2 together until a few months ago when I was talking to my mother, who went into great detail about it. I was a very gregarious child, outgoing, extroverted, friends with everyone. It was at the time a middle-class neighbourhood, and 3 houses down from ours, on the same side of the street, was a huge park. My mother was a nurse, and my father was a salesman, but mother worked a second shift, while my father worked days. I rarely had a babysitter, only if they went out for dinner or a movie, but they did go out often, and there were always older kids in the neighbourhood to babysit. One sitter who I really liked lived a few blocks or so away, and down the street a little bit. Vicky had babysat a few times before that, and it was pretty uneventful. She'd play games with me, and do my hair, play dress up, pretty basic stuff. So, anyhow, one day, I had gone with my friends down the park. I remember there was a ball field at the time, and a sand lot next to the field. My friends wanted to play on the monkey bars, but I wanted to play in the sand. I looked at the sandbox, and my babysitter Vicky was standing there. I told my friends I was going down to the sandbox, and ran off. We played in the sand, building a castle, and she asked me if I wanted to get something cold to drink. It was a stifling hot day, and, of course, I said yes. So she takes my hand, and we start walking to her place. She starts telling me about her puppies, and asking me if I wanted to play with them. Of course, I get all giddy, and now can't wait to get to her house. This was where my memory had stopped, and after my mother told me what happened, the rest of it flooded back. My mother just happened to be talking to my sister and I about some of the places we lived. She mentioned Monica Lane. I told her I remembered the park, and how big it seemed, and she asked me if I remember being kidnapped. I immediately thought she was kidding, and then the look on her face told me otherwise. She said it was around 5 in the afternoon, and one of my friends had come to the door to ask me to come back outside, sure that I'd gotten bored and walked back home. When my mother checked the house, she realised I wasn't there, and, 7 months pregnant with my sister, my mother sprints to the park, screaming my name. After asking several kids if they'd seen me, with no clue, she went to the ball field and asked the older boys if they'd seen me. One of the boys she said was around 14, said that he'd seen a younger woman playing with a girl that fit my description in the sand and walk off in the general direction, and that was all he knew. My mother ran across the street to one of the houses and asked to use their phone and call the police. By the time the police got there, my dad had come home and some of the neighbours were trying to help my mother. So there's a search party out looking for me, screaming my name and knocking on doors. The police had gone back to the park to ask the boys if they knew who had been with me and if they knew who she was. Between the boys and the neighbours, they had deduced who it was who had let me off, and I have no idea how, honestly. The police and the entourage got to her home. She lived with her parents, but they weren't home, and knocked on the door. She came to the door and told me she hadn't seen me, and that she'd been home all day. The police asked to come in, and for some reason she said okay. They went through the house and went to the basement and found me. That's what my mother knew. And then I remembered it was literally like a floodgate had opened, and I started crying. At 6, you sort of trust everyone, and she'd been in our home. I never got a bad feeling from her. My parents didn't either. But when we walked into her house, I remember that cold feeling washing over me and getting very worried. I remember starting to cry and saying I wanted to go home, over and over. She takes me into her kitchen and gets me a glass of water and a tissue. I hear dogs barking, and next to the kitchen is a stairway that goes down and leads to where the barking is coming from. She starts trying to console me to go in downstairs, tell me there's all sorts of toys and games. I reluctantly agree, and she grabs my hand to lead me downstairs. The dogs are going nuttier and start screaming. At this point, Vicky is getting bizarre. She's screaming at me to shut up. If you don't shut up, I will throw you in the cage with the dogs and they will eat you. Shut up! Dragging me down the stairs and still screaming. I was scared out of my mind. I remember crying so hard I was hyperventilating, and I'm screaming so hard that I'm not making any sounds. Vicky then flips a switch and starts being syrupy sweet, trying to calm me down. She tells me that she was just playing a game. Then she tells me she wants to play hide and seek. She must have been relatively skilled at calming me down, because the next thing I know, I hear knocking on the door upstairs, and I wasn't crying. The houses were all the same sort of tract houses that Sears used to sell. Not huge, but not too small. But you could hear everything at any spot in the house. I keep hearing the knocking, and she tells me that it's her friends. They're coming to play hide and seek. She convinced me to let her put a piece of masking tape over my mouth so I wouldn't make a sound, and lifted me into a wooden box next to the kennel. She put a big pile of blankets over me and told me to be quiet and so they didn't find me. The whole time the dogs were going crazy, but when she calmed me down, they calmed down too. They still looked incredibly mean, but they were no longer frothing at the mouth and only slightly growling until the knocking started. I remember scrunching in there, confused, still scared and convinced that the dogs were going to get out and eat me. I was crying again and hyperventilating. I remember taking the tape off my mouth because I couldn't breathe, but remembered I needed to be quiet because I was afraid what she would do if I screamed. I laid in that smelly box next to a big bag of dog food, sweating like hell, tears rolling down my face. I sort of pushed the blankets to the side, but only enough so that I could pull them back over if someone came. I recall thinking about my dad and wondering if he'd come find me. All of a sudden, I hear what sounds like adults yelling my name. They come down the stairs, and the dogs are going crazy again. Over and over, men are yelling my name, and then I hear a man say,
"If you don't shut those dogs up, I will."
I was in a large box, like a carpenter's toolbox type of thing, with tape hanging off my mouth when they opened the lid. I remember a very nice man asking me my name, and if I was okay. I don't remember answering him in any other way besides screams and tears, and grabbing his neck so hard my dad had to practically pry me off him. I remember my parents taking me to the hospital to be checked out, and that's all I really remember. Mother said that Vicky was found guilty of attempted kidnapping, and last she knew, she was in prison, but couldn't remember the last time she had heard of anything. We moved from the area shortly thereafter, and I haven't been back since. I do know that Mother said that her parents were odd, but they didn't know them. She had met Vicky from neighbours that had used her as a babysitter, and had never heard of anything bad, and that I always seemed happy with her. She lived in the general neighbourhood, but it would have been 2 blocks over and 1 block down. Mother said that they never picked her up. She always walked over. When they'd get home, they'd drive her, but never noticed anything out of the ordinary. Mother and Father had only met her parents when they came to the door to ask for forgiveness, that Vicky hadn't meant to do anything bad and was a good girl. Mother said my father picked up her father by the t-shirt and told him if they ever came on the property again, he'd kill them. I remember her name and sort of what she looked like, but would have no idea if she walked up to me who she is. But still, I hope we never meet again.